Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Ahmaud Arbery's mother remembers her beloved son.
Ahmaud was my baby boy. Ahmaud was happy. Ahmaud was loved.
Brian Buckmire is live in Georgia with Wanda Cooper Jones' take on the trial's jury selection process. And could that jury selection be a sign of things to come in another high-profile case?
We're apparently having a very difficult time down in Brunswick, Georgia, selecting a jury.
What it could mean for the upcoming trial of former Louisville police officer Brett Hankinson. Plus, Kathy Durst's family testifies in front of a grand jury in New York. New developments in Robert Durst's most recent murder case. And later,
you cannot discuss this case or anything about it.
What prompted that stern warning from the judge in the murder trial of Markeith Loyd? Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast.
Welcome everybody to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Jesse Weber in for Brian Buckmire along with Terry Austin. We're now nearly 2 weeks into jury selection in the trial for the death of Ahmaud Arbery. In all, 64 jurors are planned to be selected, and then that number will be whittled down to 16 before the trial can begin for the 3 Georgia men accused of Arbery's murder. Gregory and Travis McMichael and William Arati Bryan face charges of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault in the shooting of the 25-year-old. In February 2020, prosecutors say that father and son duo Gregory and Travis McMichael tailed Arbery in a pickup truck while he was out for a jog near his Brunswick, Georgia home. Travis McMichael opened fire and killed Arbery, claiming self-defense. Bryan followed along in his own vehicle, recording the incident on his phone. Jury selection began for all 3 men last Monday in Glynn County, Georgia, and that's where Law and Crime Daily host Brian Buckmire joins us now live. And Brian, it's good to see you. You spoke with Arbery's mother today, correct, about her thoughts on jury selection so far. What can you tell us?
Yes, Jesse. So just looking a little further back, we started with 19 jurors this morning. Started a little late because one was running late, actually, but quickly went to questions eliminating many of those 19 jurors. In fact, 4 jurors today said they knew Ahmaud, and when Jason Sheffield, the defense attorney for one of the McMichaels, Travis McMichael specifically, asked 2 questions that seemed to have possibly eliminated a number of jurors as well, with 8 jurors saying they already had a negative impression of Travis McMichael and the other defendants, and also they had a negative impression on the delay in the prosecution of this case. Now, as you said, Wanda Cooper Jones also came up and spoke to me about the jury selection process, both about her son and how they wanted the jury to know who he was, but also about the jury selection process as a whole. Wanda Cooper Jones said, while she may be soft-spoken at times when I spoke with her, her words were powerful when talking about Ahmaud and seeking the right jury for the trial.
Picking the correct jurors to make the correct decision, which is guilty, it's going to be very important that we get the right individuals. I feel confident that we'll get the right individuals because the same citizens of this county were able to get out the public defender of Jackie Johnson, the DA, who waited forever to make an arrest. So I'm confident that they will have their hearts in a good place and come in and listen to the facts of the case and make the right decision.
Brian, when you were speaking to Wanda Cooper Jones, how was she feeling, during the interview? How's she reacting to the ongoing trial, the jury selection process?
The way I would describe Ms. Cooper Jones is subtle strength. When you speak with her, you often have to lean in to hear what she's speaking about, but she has very strong words about her love for Ahmaud Arbery and also the process that we're going through. She's very hopeful that this conviction is going to come about, but she's also very proud of her community and believes that those here will come to the correct decision in finding the McMichaels and Bryan guilty of murdering Ahmaud Arbery.
Can't imagine what it's like for her. Now we talk about the jury selection process. I got to ask you the million-dollar question. It's been lengthy so far. Are they getting closer to nailing down the final jurors? Did we see any big revelations in court today?
So nothing huge other than many people know Ahmaud Arbery or someone connected to the case in one way, shape, or form. But as I said earlier, those questions of the negative implications that people feel about this case, and so it's really causing a lot of people to be disqualified. Yesterday, we had 6 jurors join that prospective panel of qualified jurors who will be questioned later down the road. Today, I would be surprised, based on some of the answers that these prospective jurors gave, that we may have more than even 6 jurors who add to that list to get to that magic number of 64. Today, we started with 42 prospective jurors that were qualified to be able to hear this case. Of course, everyone has a peremptory challenges to whittle down to 12 jurors and 4 alternates, but I don't think it's going to happen this week. I would expect it to occur early next week.
And you and I had talked earlier in the day about kind of what that's going to look like with preemptory strikes going back and forth and debating over that. So I don't know. We're going to have an end in sight, but it's going to be difficult to see when this actually moves into opening statements. Brian, thank you so much for reporting back to us. Appreciate it as always. Over now to Capitol Hill, where Attorney General Merrick Garland tells the Senate that all investigative techniques are being pursued involving the January 6 riots. This comes as 5 former Trump White House staffers meet with the so-called January 6th House Select Committee that is investigating the Capitol riots. Meantime, the committee postponed the request from former President Trump to hand over dozens of pages of records involving the riots. All this after the former president sued to block the release of the documents to the House, citing executive privilege. Since then, the National Archives announced that it will make hundreds of Trump-era documents available to Congress starting next month. Former President Trump has objected to the release of these documents as well, but the archives said that it would need a court order to prevent the release. So far, the Biden administration has refused to intervene to block access to these records. And still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, could Robert Durst face another murder trial? What lies ahead for the convicted real estate heir in the 1982 disappearance of his wife? But first, a pre-trial hearing for the ex-police officer involved in the death of Breonna Taylor. We take you inside the courtroom. That's next.
It was the video that shocked the nation. An unarmed black jogger, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, gunned down in broad daylight.
We are going to make sure that we find justice in this case.
The 3 men charged will now stand trial.
I told him stop till he hit me. I had nothing to do. There's nothing else I can do.
You're a passerby coming through?
Nah, not necessarily.
That's my son that shot him. I was in the back of the truck.
Starting October 18th, watch live gavel-to-gavel coverage on the Law and Crime Network.
And welcome back to Law and Crime Daily, everybody. We're following developments right now out of Louisville, Kentucky, where a pretrial hearing is held for the ex-officer involved in the shooting death of Breonna Taylor. Brett Hankinson is charged with wanton endangerment for endangering 3 of Breonna Taylor's neighbors after firing his weapon into their apartments. Taylor was shot and killed in March 2020 by Hankinson's colleague, Officer Miles Cosgrove, after Hankinson and 2 other officers entered her apartment. They say it was part of a drug investigation. Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, fired a warning shot at the officer, saying he didn't hear anyone announce themselves. The officers fired back, hitting Taylor with 6 bullets. She died as a result of her injuries. Hankinson and Detective Cosgrove were fired from the police department later that year, and Sergeant John Mattingly retired. Ahead of Hankinson's February 2022 trial, both sides met on Wednesday to discuss juror plans. That's referring to lengthy jury selection in both the Derek Chauvin case and, of course, the ongoing selection in the trial for the death of Ahmaud Arbery.
We had some conversations with the folks up in Minnesota who did the Chauvin trial. And they initially summoned 600 people. They said that they then received 475 returns on those summonses. They then sent out another letter telling them what trial they had been summoned for and attached the questionnaire.
And they're apparently apparently having a very difficult time down in Brunswick, Georgia, selecting a jury. And again, I don't know how things stand in Louisville at this point, but there's no way to predict whether 250 will be enough or not, but I would certainly hope it is.
That footage was from 2021, not 1992. Man, that's just standard definition right there. Joining me right now, co-host Terry Austin and former senior homicide prosecutor Bernardo Villalona. It's great to have you both here. Bernardo, I start with you. We just heard from the judge and defense attorney who both referenced other lengthy jury selections in other trials. Is that something we should expect here on out for, highly publicized, officer-involved shootings?
Absolutely, because when you're dealing with officer shootings, it does bring a lot of the community out and a lot of different community members in terms of protesters that do come out. I do expect in this case of Brett Hankinson, where unfortunately a wall got more justice than Breonna Taylor, that there's going to be a lot of protests. I'm not sure whether they'll have any issue in terms of selecting a jury. I think it's more of there's going to be a lot of noise in and outside of the courtroom.
Well, Terry, the case against Hankinson involves the endangerment of the neighbors, but do you think we'll ever see criminal charges against any of the officers in connection with Breonna Taylor's death?
I don't think we'll see those charges on the state level, Jesse. I mean, there were 32 rounds fired by these 3 police officers. And as you mentioned, Mattingly and Cosgrove hit Breonna Taylor, and we have had no criminal charges as far as they are concerned. And the Attorney General for the state announced there were not going to be any charges because there was justified use of force. But the good news is we still do have that Department of Justice investigation, and we could still see some charges brought. And in addition, you may recall that in September, there was a $12 million settlement. So some movement has been made on this case.
Movement, but some things still up in the air. We're going to move right now onto federal court, where a judge rules that previously sealed Jeffrey Epstein documents will remain under wraps in the ongoing Prince Andrew litigation. Law&Crime Daily first reported about these documents earlier this month after the Epstein estate agreed to release the once confidential settlement agreement between the late financier and sexual assault accuser Virginia Giuffre. In a lawsuit filed this summer, Giuffre alleges that Prince Andrew sexually assaulted her in 3 locations, 2 of which were Jeffrey Epstein-owned properties. Giuffre says that Epstein trafficked her and made her have sex with his friends, including Prince Andrew. On Wednesday, a federal judge granted a motion made by Prince Andrew's defense to keep those documents sealed. This comes after the same judge made a ruling earlier this week that depositions in the Giuffre and Prince Andrew lawsuit must be completed by July 2022. And also in federal court, the family of former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos comes front and center in the fraud trial of Elizabeth Holmes. This week, a representative for the DeVos family took the stand, testifying that Holmes convinced the family to invest $100 million in the now-defunct company Theranos. After an initial investment of $50 million, the family then doubled it after they were told that the so-called Edison devices were able to do up to 300 blood tests and were being used on military helicopters and by pharmaceutical companies. Holmes, the former CEO, claimed that Theranos would revolutionize blood testing with state-of-the-art devices, but later tests found many problems with this technology. Holmes faces 12 fraud charges in this case, and if convicted, she could spend 20 years in prison. She has pled not guilty to all charges. Coming up on Law&Crime Daily, a frustrated judge in the courtroom, her message to the jurors before the state rested their case. Plus, Kathy Durst's siblings testify in front of a grand jury about what they think happened to their sister back in 1982. All this and more next. Welcome back. The family of Kathy McCormick Durst takes the stand to testify as a grand jury convenes in Robert Durst's latest murder case. 29-year-old Kathy Durst vanished back in 1982. She was legally declared dead, though, in 2017, though her body has never been found. It has long been suspected that her husband, real estate heir Robert Durst, was responsible for her disappearance and death. Just last month, Durst was convicted for the 2000 murder of his best friend, Susan Berman. Weeks ago, he was sentenced to life in prison for that conviction, and days after a sentence was handed down, Durst was hospitalized and put on a ventilator after a COVID-19 diagnosis. Last week, though, a New York State investigator filed a second-degree murder charge against Durst for the killing of his wife, Kathy. Now, News 12 reports that a grand jury has convened to hear evidence gathered against Robert Durst for the disappearance of his wife. On Wednesday, jurors heard directly from Kathy Durst's brother, sister, and brother-in-law, who say they long suspected that Kathy was stuck in an abusive marriage. Grand jury proceedings are expected to continue on Friday and precede a formal indictment. Okay, so let's break this down. Terry, Kathy Durst disappeared in 1982. Many of the witnesses may no longer be available. How is the prosecution going to make its case?
This is going to be very difficult. As you said, there's no witnesses probably around at this point, and they're really going to have to search for those who still might be around. 1982 was a long time ago. And also, don't forget, we don't have a body, and oftentimes the body shows us what exactly happened. But I think they'll still be able to proceed forward. You're going to have those witnesses like the family members. I think also we're going to see all of the investigators who were originally involved in the case, including the lead investigator, Joseph Becerra. So I think there are things that they can do. We might even see Andrew Jarecki, who was the director, if you recall, in The Jinx. So we'll see what happens.
And not to be morbid here, Bernardo, but as we saw in the trial and sentencing, Durst himself is in pretty poor health. So even being hospitalized with COVID-19, what would happen with legal proceedings if he's not well enough to make court appearances, or I hate to say this, even dies?
So if he dies, the case is completely over because you're not going to prosecute a corpse. However, in terms of him actually being sick and not being able to assist in his defense, then that will slow down the proceedings, because if a defendant is not able to comprehend and be able to assist in his defense, then the case can't go forward. It's going to be pulled in a stalling pattern.
The saga of Robert Durst continues once again. When we come back, the state rests in Florida for Markeith Loyd's second murder trial, but not before the judge had a word with the jury about potential misconduct outside of the courtroom. More on this next. And welcome back. An update now in the search for missing hiker Lauren L. Cho. California authorities confirmed that recently discovered remains have been positively identified as hers. Cho went missing back in June while staying with friends at a home in the Yucca Valley near Joshua Tree National Park. The friend said that Cho was upset and walked away from the home, leaving all of her personal belongings behind. Her ex-boyfriend reported her missing about 3 hours later, indicating to investigators that she was suffering from mental distress. Remains were discovered on October 10th in an area described by authorities as rugged terrain of the open desert of the Yucca Valley. On Thursday, those remains were confirmed to belong to the 30-year-old. The cause and manner of her death is still pending based on the toxicology results. And now over to Florida, where the state has officially rested in Markeith Loyd's second murder trial. Loyd is on trial for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, who was killed while pursuing the defendant. Loyd was previously charged and convicted for the murder of his pregnant ex-girlfriend, Shawday Dixon. Now, in that case, he avoided the death penalty and was ultimately sentenced to life in prison. However, if convicted in this case, Loyd will face the death penalty again. Before the state rested its case on Thursday, the judge had to address comments made by some of the jurors outside of the courtroom regarding the judge and the defense attorneys. Listen to what the judge was told by the deputies that heard the conversation.
Deputies overheard the following comments. Judge is getting frustrated, long breaks, sidebars, and everything keeps stopping. Defense is over him, Loyd and his outburst.
Yikes. When the judge came back in, Judge Marquez made sure to instruct them on their duty as jurors, meaning they cannot discuss the case.
Because I want to make sure that you're properly instructed and understand. So let me go over again what we mean by you can't have any discussions about this case outside of this courtroom. It literally means absolutely nothing. You don't even talk about the lights going off in the courtroom if they should happen to go off. I mean, that's an exaggeration. But anything that's related to the trial, the people in the trial, the clerks, the attorneys, the people in the audience, you can't talk about any of that. You cannot discuss this case or anything about it outside of jury deliberations when you're handed the case to reach a verdict.
Well, hopefully they got the message. Bernarda, the state rested just a few days into the trial. Jury selection actually took longer than that. Is that common? Could that mean that the state believes they have a strong enough case here?
No, the length of the case usually doesn't really make much sense in terms of whether it's a strong case or a weak case. It's just what evidence is presented to the jury. So the prosecution is confident that they've proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. In terms of the length of the jury selection, obviously because this case is a death penalty case, it's much more difficult selecting a jury to determine the death penalty stage in a case.
Terry, there was another interesting moment because right before the state rested, there was a Richardson hearing in connection with one of the witnesses. What was that all about?
So a Richardson hearing is a hearing to determine whether or not there is a discovery violation. And what the defense attorney here was claiming is that the prosecution failed to discover and to produce all of the photos in the case. The witness was Karen Livingsgood, and she was the lead crime senior investigator. She took 33 photos, but apparently only some of those were produced. She explained that 1 through 13 had to do with another case and that the remainder had to do with the Walmart case. And all of those were produced. And the judge basically seemed a little bit frustrated with the defense. And she said, it sounds like all of the photos have been produced. There absolutely has been no violation here. The numbers add up, so we're going to just keep continuing. And they allowed the photos to be introduced, and they allowed the witness to testify.
All right, so even despite what happened with the jury, despite no discovery violations, case moving forward. Bernarda, Terry, thank you so much. Everyone out there, thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We're going to see you next time as we discuss justice in America.